I refrained myself from putting my name out there, but I just can't keep this to myself anymore. Last year, despite all that was going on, I decided to vacation to a small cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. It wasn't any more than 500 square feet, but it was enough for me to get away from it all. And before you ask, I followed all the rules for going on a trip alone. I gave my friends and family my location and the date I expected to return, and kept a radio on me for emergencies along with my sidearm just in case. I began driving February 16th, and by the 18th I was driving up to the cabin. It was late at night, and the only thing on my mind was the bed waiting for me inside. I got out of my car and stirred up my trunk with my bags and just thought, fuck it, and decided to unload tomorrow morning. Honestly, I wish I hadn't. As I walked up to the porch of the cabin, the wood steps creaking below my feet, echoing in the forest around me, I heard what sounded like clicking. Click, 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 click. It was faint but loud enough to get my attention. I spun around, only to see my parked car. The clicking stopped. Jesus Christ, I need to sleep. Walking into the cabin, I flipped on and then off the lights, and flopped onto the bed, fully dressed, and just passed out. A few hours later, I was woken up by a scream. It sounded like a woman's, and it immediately woke me up. I laid on my stomach in the darkness waiting to hear it again. My heart pounded. Every second felt like minutes. Every minute felt like hours. Until I heard it again, a shrill, blood-curdling scream out in the forest, distant but not more than a half a mile away. Shit, what do I do? I slowly got up and grabbed my sidearm. I can't do anything. I sprang up and ran to my car, but only when I reached out my car door was open. I turned on my phone light and what I saw wasn't good. My car doors and trunk were all open and my stuff, including my ammo and my first aid kit, were gone. I was panicking. I got into the driver's seat and tried to start my car. Over and over I tried to start it, and then it stalled. I smashed my fist down into the horn, screaming in a fit of rage and panic. And then the screaming began again. A woman's distant scream drove me to do something, anything. So I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and rushed into the forest. For hours I walked into the direction of the screaming, and after 3 hours of walking, the screaming came from the opposite direction. I ran back towards the sound, surely to find an injured woman back at the cabin, but I only found more trees. Before I knew it, I was lost. And then the woods went dead silent. No crickets, no wind, no screaming. Now I was being really panicked, disoriented, and now in dead silent. In a flurry of paranoia, I flipped on my flashlight, and all around me, thousands of them, eyes, glowing eyes surrounded me. I then remembered my old ranger training, and I immediately leaned my head back to one side and began running. I figured my equilibrium was off for some reason, and then I realized it was them, whatever the fuck those eyes belonged to. There wasn't any woman, it was all of them. I ran as fast as I could. I heard them following me, the fleshy tapping of feet, the knocking of hooves, and the flapping of wings, all behind me. Soon, I reached a river and then I began sprinting hard. My lungs were on fire, my heart was about to burst. I ran for what felt like hours, and suddenly I stumbled upon a small town, lights, and a small gas station. I ran into the streetlights and turned around to the woods with my gun and flashlight on the forest. The eyes just sat at the edge of the forest, staring at me. I backed up to the pump of the gas station and sat there, staring at them too, until eventually the sun came up. The owner of the gas station arrived and gave me a ride to the police station, where I was able to call my friends for a ride home. Once I got home, I got myself weekly therapy appointments and just kept my mouth shut to everyone, but my therapist knows what happened. My friends think I ended up getting robbed. I couldn't tell them what happened, they wouldn't believe me. But maybe you will. I don't know what those things were, or why the hell they were there. Just don't. Do not vacation to the Appalachians. A very good friend of mine invited a few friends and me over to see his hometown in the Philippines. He was visiting his relatives for a few days, but he wanted to bring us along because he hasn't been back there since he was 7, and he was afraid that he might feel a little alienated at first. We were hesitant to agree due to the cost of the trip and how rude it would be to intervene in a family reunion. But my friend explained that Filipinos really enjoyed company and might even let us stay in one of their houses. To top it off, he showed us pictures of a stunning white sandy beach right next to his hometown, and at this point the offer was hard to decline. We went there a few weeks ago and just got back. What experience still haunts me even though we have returned. I was a bit of a skeptic, and I would have probably been the last of my friends to believe old folklore. But it seems the locals provided better explanations than I could at those moments. For our first few days there, we were in Manila, the capital, and these days were some of the most normal. The cities there were pretty modernized, and the locals spoke decent English, so we didn't feel that set apart. We spent these first few days tasting the food and getting to know the culture. They were friendly people, but they weren't very chatty. By our 4th day, it was time to go to our friend's place, which was a long way from Manila, in a province called Bicol. We traveled by car, which nearly took us half the day, and further we went, the more rural the places looked. Vast roads turned into rice paddies, and buildings became huts and old wooden houses. The only vehicles on the road were rusty pickup trucks, pedicabs, and jeepneys, and our rented Toyota Vios stuck out like a sore thumb. We stayed there for around 12 days, and here were some of our downright creepy experiences. Day 1. We arrived at my friend's place, and his family welcomed us with open arms. There was a simple party, with enough food to feed a whole neighborhood, karaoke, which was a Filipino staple, and beer. It was all fun, and everyone was laughing and singing until it started to get dark. And this was when it started to get strange. Immediately after the sun went down, at around 6 p.m., they started cleaning up, and guests started to leave. It was strange because it was so early and everyone still looked as if they were having fun. I asked my friend why the party was over so soon, and he just said that people in these parts hit the sack earlier, and they say it's not safe to go out at night. The thought of this place not being really safe confused me, since the town was small and very rural. So criminals didn't seem like an issue, but I shrugged it off, and we slept in an extra room in my friend's house. Day 2. My friend brought us to his cousin's house down the street. He was close to her as a kid and really wanted to pay her a visit. She was 5 months pregnant and he couldn't wait to see her. But when we got to the house, there were a few men boarding up the windows. My friend yelled at the men in Filipino. I couldn't understand, and one of the men yelled back. My friend explained to us that he was her husband and that we could go right in. We climbed the steps to the door, which were strangely sprinkled with salt, and turned the doorknob, which hung a necklace of garlic. We apprehensively went into the house, and I could see his cousin sitting in a rocking chair, her belly slightly bloated. The two cousins chatted for a bit until the strange modifications to the house were mentioned. We were all curious and she could see that. She spoke in rough English for all of us to understand, and the words she managed to say were, "I'm afraid of the tick-tick." My friend scoffed after the statement, at which we all looked at them in confusion. My friend explained that the tick-tick was an old Filipino legend of a humanoid monster with a long tongue, which it used to suck out fetuses from the mother's womb. 3 things deterred the tick-tick and the other Filipino monsters: salt, garlic, and anything blessed by a priest. Like my friend, I didn't think anything of it, but the fact that locals would go through all this trouble meant that there must be something more to it. We went on our way and said goodbye to my friend's cousin, but that wasn't the last we saw of her. Day 4. We were starting to get bored, so we decided to go to the beach. It was beautiful with a crystal clear water and smooth white sand. The only thing strange was that there was nobody out there swimming, and everyone stayed well away from the water's edge. When we tried to get in the water, a fisherman went over to us and shouted at us to stay away. My friend went over to talk to him. The fisherman told him that a little boy went swimming in these waters the other day and went missing. When the boy's friends were questioned, they told the parents that he was pulled into the water and dragged by the ocean. There were some who speculated it was the work of the shokoi, a sea monster who dragged swimmers into deep waters to feast on their flesh. This was the second time a monster was mentioned to us during our stay. Though we didn't necessarily believe him at the time, we still didn't swim as respects to the missing boy. That night, we ran a little late getting back to the house, and as we rode a jeepney, the sun went down and it was pitch black aside from the headlights made by the vehicle. We passed by a man walking alone beside the road, and when he saw us, he raised his hand, gesturing us to stop. The jeep driver kept going and ignored the man. I told my friend to ask the driver why he ignored the potential passenger. My friend told me that the driver didn't pick up people this late, and that the driver feared they might not even be people at all. We woke up that day and were surprised to see that none of our stuff was as we left when we were asleep. Our bags were wide open and all the clothes were thrown around the room. The pillows were on the floor and the shoes were on the bed. The room was just in complete chaos. My cousin called for his grandfather, who owned the house, to see the mess. He looked around the room and chuckled. We asked him what he was laughing about. He whispered something to my friend, who translated his message. He told us that the children must have gotten into the room. It was strange since we never saw any children in the house before. I asked the old man if they had kids in the house, and he managed to make out the words, "used to." After this experience, I grew ever fearful of what this town had to hide, and how much truth these legends had. Day 7. A couple of days ago, we learned that nobody went outside of their houses at night in fear of some strange things. But it turns out not everybody followed that rule. That morning, the whole town was distressed as the body of a teenage boy was found beside a clump of banana trees near a densely wooded forest. He had been impaled by a sharp piece of bamboo sticking out of the ground. He was supposedly with a girl that night, but no trace of her has been found. My friend had overheard some gossip from the townsfolk and explained what the locals thought had happened. It turns out the two had been seeing each other behind their parents' back, as teenagers do, and that these two teenagers weren't particularly superstitious, so they arranged meetups at night despite the elders warning them of the dangers of going out after dark. It is said that a colony of encantos, which are sort of like fairies but a lot more sinister than those fairy tales, lived in those banana trees. The prince saw the young lady and wanted to take her as his bride. These creatures had the ability to control nature, so the prince made a bamboo grow out of the ground and stabbed the boy in the chest. He took the girl away to the land of the Encantos, where she is forever trapped. Normally, I would just brush these stories as nonsense, but after all that I've heard, I don't know what to believe. Day 9. We didn't do much that day because one of my friends caught a terrible fever. He was burning up, and the nearest drugstore was miles away. Without our knowledge, my friend's grandfather called in a witch doctor, and from the first look at him, I knew he was nothing more than a quack. He was a frail old man who looked as if he needed the medical attention. With him, he carried a basket of leaves, herbs, candles, and other junk. I didn't want him to touch my friend because I feared it would only make it worse, but the family insisted, and we let the doctor into the room. He felt my friend's forehead and he asked him to take off his shirt. My friend was sweaty and pale as the quack rubbed a bunch of leaves on his back. The doctor faced the family and asked them for something. My friend ran over to stop them, but his family reassured him and he sat back down. I asked him what happened, and he said that the doctor asked for the juice of a 1-day-old puppy. I was surprised and confused and was unable to speak at the thought of it. An hour later, a relative arrived with a bowl of slimy red liquid. The doctor grabbed it and mixed in some herb which looked a bit like mint. He held it in front of my friend's mouth and made him drink it. I nearly barfed at the horrifying sight, but couldn't speak due to utter shock. The doctor stood and left the room, as did my friend's family. When we were alone, we argued amongst ourselves, why would we let that nut even touch our friend? We stopped as our friend slowly sat up and looked at us with his normal reddish tan skin. He no longer felt warm, nor did he show any signs of ever being sick in the first place. The doctor cured him. I don't know how, but he did. Day 10. This was a Sunday, and when we woke up in the morning, my friend's family was already urging us to go to the church. The church was Catholic, and they kept the doors open to let the air in, which made sense in the warm climate. A few of my friends and I, who weren't Catholic, stayed outside while pretty much the rest of the town was in the church. It was about midway through the service when an old man arrived. He just stood outside, staring at us with a creepy grin. The townsfolk started to notice him and immediately gestured for us to go inside. We followed. Once we were through the doorframe, the man's grin disappeared. Everyone was just staring at him, wondering what he would do next. A few minutes later, he left, and the mass continued as if nothing ever happened. We went over to our friend and asked who the hell that was, and he told us nobody knew. I asked why the whole town seemed afraid of him if they don't even know him. He simply replied, "In such a small town, not knowing somebody is scary." I still had a lot of questions in my mind, but decided to keep them to myself. Who was that man? Why was he intently staring at us? And why did he not follow us into the church? Day 11. We were woken up by the sounds of screaming coming from a few houses away. It was early, around 3 a.m. The whole town ran out of their houses to see the commotion. It came from the house of my friend's cousin. We ran over there, still in my pajamas, to see a decently large crowd gathered in front of their house. The husband was climbing down the steps, frantically shouting something in Filipino. My friend looked over at my other friend and grabbed her shoulders. He told her that they needed medical attention. She nodded and walked over to the frightened man, with the rest of us following closely behind. She tells the man that she's a paramedic, and she grabs her hand. And he grabs her hands, tears flowing down his face, and yells, "Salamat," which is one word I actually know. It meant thank you. He leads her inside the house, and we quickly follow. The woman was sitting on the rocking chair, and her face wet from tears and sweat. My friend does a quick checkup of her, feeling her belly and asking her questions, while my other friend translates. After a moment, my paramedic friend looked up at us, horrified. "Her baby is gone," she said. The rest of us were just in shock. She asked the couple if they had a miscarriage, and they denied. She told us that there was fresh puncture wounds on her belly button, as if someone poked a large syringe through it. This puzzled us as there were no way any intruder could have gotten into the house since they boarded up all the windows and the couple said they had locked the door. It started to rain outside, and I noticed the ceiling started to leak. I looked up and saw there was a golf ball sized hole on the roof. I asked the couple about the hole, and at first they seemed confused, like they didn't know they had a very noticeable hole on their ceiling. When the woman saw it, she got down on her knees and cried. She kept shouting words in Filipino, constantly yelling out "tick tick," which was the only word I understood. When the sun rose, my paramedic friend and Filipino friend stayed in the house, while the rest of us left. I could never forget what had transpired in that house. Day 12. This was the day we left, and to be honest, I was relieved, but I was also frustrated. We didn't leave with happy memories or refreshed spirits. Instead, we were left with questions about the town where my friend had spent his childhood. But perhaps the biggest question that bothered me is, if there were any other towns like this in the Philippines, or if all of them were just like this town. I guess these questions won't be answered now, and I don't know if I'm ever coming back. We left the town, and as our car drove away, we looked back to see all of the locals waving their hands in goodbye. They looked as if they were relieved that we have left. It's been a horrible summer so far. Work has been extremely stressful, and then my boyfriend dumped me for one of my friends. So I've spent most of the summer watching Netflix alone in my shitty apartment. It's been pretty depressing. I honestly thought a beach trip would make it better, but it didn't. It only made things worse. Everything started off great. I spent the first few days of my trip lounging on a beach and getting drunk on cheap booze from the hotel bar. That's where I met Mia. She was another solo traveler staying at my resort. We bonded instantly, and I was thrilled to have a friend. I was having fun by myself, but it was nice to not be alone all the time. I thought maybe my new friend and I could do something together. I was feeling restless. I could only sit on the beach for so long.
Hey, you want to go on a hike? Maybe see some ruins? What about kayaking? They said at the front desk there's a local shop that rents them out. We could kayak to that island.
She pointed out into the horizon at a speck of green. That sounded fun. I agreed, and that afternoon we walked down to the rental shop. The interior was dim, and the ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. The man behind the counter had long dreads and wore an unbuttoned Hawaiian shirt. He smiled as we approached the counter. We rented 2 boats for the following morning. He pulled out a large map and showed us where to pick up the boats and gave us some basic info on how to get to the island, which was just visible on the horizon through the dingy store window. The clerk raved about the wildlife and white sands on the uninhabited island.
What's that?
Mia interrupted, pressing her finger down on the map. I glanced over to see her indicate another speck of land beyond the one we were headed to.
It's a barrier island, but you can't go out there. It's a protected area. You'll get fined.
Mia nodded and asked no more about it. We paid and wrapped up our conversation. The next morning, Mia and I met at dawn. We were quiet as we set off in our kayaks, sleepy but excited. The water shimmered in the morning sunlight. The temperature was already high. I dreaded how it would be that afternoon. We paddled over calm waters for nearly half an hour, the island looming closer and closer. When we finally landed on the white sandy beach, I was thrilled to explore. The kayak guy had said there was a short trail that would take you to a waterfall. He certainly hadn't lied about how beautiful it was. Tropical birds screamed in the trees, and the schools of fish sped through clear water. I peered into the lush foliage, eager to start the trail. We followed the path at a leisurely pace. It was a relief to be in the shade, even that early in the day. When the trail finally ended at a thin waterfall, we both took a dip in the cool water below. I couldn't believe how magical it all was. Back on the beach, we snacked on food packed from the hotel. I was pleased with our trip. The early morning paddle had certainly been worth it. When I suggested we load up and head back though, Mia shook her head.
I think we should go further, to the other island.
I stared at her.
It's protected, you heard him. We'll get fined.
She laughed.
Oh, come on. They'll never know we were there. A couple of girls in kayaks are the least of their worries. And besides,
she continued, chewing her sandwich,
you were blown away by this place. This is nothing. Just imagine how much more pristine and beautiful a protected island will be.
I didn't want to go, but I had to agree with her. This place was super cool, but I was curious about what wildlife could be on the other island. And sure, there had been evidence of humans here. Trash and fire pits. But hesitantly, I agreed. Mia jumped for joy.
This is going to be so fun,
she yelled.
We have to be back by sundown. I'm not staying out there long,
I said sternly. The last thing I wanted was any trouble in a foreign country, no matter how small.
Of course,
she replied, eyes sparkling. Her enthusiasm was infectious. We headed for the boats and launched them out into the calm waters. I regretted the decision almost instantly. The midday sun was harsh and blinding, and I started sweating like crazy. The life jacket only made it worse. By the time we approached the new island, I knew I was getting overheated. We had only brought so much water, and I nearly drunk all of mine. Mia had been right though. It was beautiful. The natural beach was full of driftwood and large shells, crabs scuttled along the sands, and birds wheeled overhead. Lizards sunned on nearby rocks. This island was even more perfect than the first.
So cool.
Mia yelled as we pushed our kayaks up on the sand.
And it's all to ourselves.
We aimlessly wandered around the beach. I had no intention of going into the bush. It looked dense and unpleasant, and I didn't want to get lost. I squatted by a tide pool for a few minutes, looking at all the shells.
Hey Mia, come look at this.
I raised my head up and scanned the beach. Mia was gone. I waited, thinking she would reappear any moment, but she didn't. Uncertain as to what to do, I found shade under some palm trees and came close to the boats. I began to panic. I was on a protected island illegally with a girl I barely knew, and no one knew we were here. What was I thinking? I waited, and I waited some more. I drank all the water, and I began to get really anxious. This island had been a mistake. Finally, as the sun began to drop towards the horizon, I decided to build a fire. The bugs had been eating me alive, and I thought the smoke might repel them. I piled up dry twigs and leaves and lit them with a cigarette lighter from my pack. I blew on the embers and flames climbed the dry kindling. I sat back, pleased with myself, and looked up to see Mia standing directly over me.
Where the hell have you been?
I yelled, startled.
I've been waiting for you for hours.
She stared at me blankly and didn't reply. I frowned as she sat on the sand across from me. Something was wrong. Mia was pale and cold, and sweat drenched her face. She didn't seem to recognize me.
Mia, are you okay?
Mia was a shell of her former talkative self. Irritation turned to concern and then fear. My stomach knotted with anxiety. Something was definitely wrong. Was she sick? But how could she get sick this quickly? She didn't speak at all the rest of the evening. I stayed with her. I didn't know what to do. I'd never been in an emergency situation like that. Finally, as her condition deteriorated, I remembered my cell phone lost in the bottom of my bag. I left her by the fire and went down to the water, where I tried to get service with my dwindling battery. Does 911 even work outside the US? I wondered stupidly. Who did I even call? I tried in vain to call the hotel, but there was no signal. Defeated, I walked back to the fire. I went over to Mia, who stared vacantly ahead.
Look, Mia, we're going to have to go back. Do you think you can paddle?
I asked her. She didn't answer. She didn't move. A horrible creeping sensation swept over me. No way. As much as I wanted to run far away from this dumb beach, I had to be sure. I reached my hand towards her. Flames danced in her glassy eyes, and I felt horrified as her lack of pulse confirmed what I had suspected. Mia was dead. Oh God, I whispered to myself. How did this happen? I cursed myself for getting into the situation. I glanced around for my things. I had to get out of there. As I shouldered my backpack, I glanced back at Mia. She stonily faced the fire, looking straight ahead. I should close her eyes, I thought, although the idea revolted me. I reached out towards her face and heard her stomach gurgle. I stopped. What the hell? And then, to my utter horror, a flood of newly hatched spiders erupted from her lips and cascaded down and onto her body. I screamed. They kept coming, hundreds, thousands of them, crawling down her body and onto the sand, towards me. I ran, faster than I ever have, to the kayak. It was long past sunset, and I paddled out into the darkness, only guided by the light of the mainland. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. My arms shook as I sliced the water with as much strength as I had. It took me a long time to reach the shore. I was so overwhelmed with fear, I have no idea how long I was out there. Only that I held it together enough to get my boat back to the rental dock. I checked out the next morning and rearranged my flight to come home early. I didn't tell anybody what happened. She was basically a stranger to me, and I don't want to be connected to her death in any way, but I know I will be. Every day I just wait for the call. I'm worried they'll link me to the missing kayak abandoned on a protected island with a dead body on the beach.